bit to get up there. Maybe if we play, I will play this now. Let me explain. Well, that's not working. Let's try it again. Share screen. Come on. Yay! Sort of. The extra notes, but it's better than it was. Can you guys look at the notes on the side? I don't know how to get rid of them.
Yes, you can see them.
We can see them if you go to slideshow, and it'll fill the screen.
Is it okay like that, or do I have to work to get rid of those?
Something.
I think there's a way to make it bigger.
Yeah, go to the bottom down there where you see the little TV,
We're gonna sit around.
Go to the bottom, do what?
We're gonna gather chairs and sit.
where you see the projection screen. The projection screen icon at the bottom. It would,
Ooh, yeah, bottom. Oh, yeah, the projection screen.
yeah, click on that.
Okay,
Yay!
okay. So
How are we gonna see the screen?
Yes, okay.
Great.
Because of my.
Good job.
Oh, I know this is me.
That's the biggest on the screen, and it's clear.
Okay, so and the big Bluetooth speaker's working. So the only thing that I can't do is show you Mary's face.
But we can
Which
hear
is
her
not-
voice.
I can try to do that, but I don't know that it'll work.
I don't think that's a good one.
There's the church.
Yes,
So how about that? Is that a pretty good compromise?
yes, we'll do.
All right, good. Do the best.
What do I hit to make it change?
There's a little arrow at the bottom here, so that's backwards, that's forwards.
You mean I'm really gonna be the only one here?
Now, when we
I
get
don't
to
think
the
so.
switching
I'm
to the other thing,
sure.
we'll have to do a little prayer dance. and figure that out.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Okay. So I guess you're on.
Country or country?
Are you going into?
I'm not leaving.
Okay.
You want me to go tell me what's done? I can do that.
Well, I made enough noise. I said, oh my gosh, I gotta go to Sunday school.
Last week.
Does the yellow microphone disappear?
I need the tissue. I'm gonna sit up front by the t-shirt.
Right, and look that way. We're almost there, guys. We're checking in and see.
You're there as far as we can go. We just, we can see the table set up with a mic on it, so we're ready to go when you are.
All right, we will not be sitting at that table, so just watch the screen.
I mean, I sit in front of you, can you still see this one?
Because the microphone has stopped working, so.
What? There's another microphone?
This is a broadcast, it's sort of an amplifier for them, but that's the one.
And it doesn't work.
Apparently not.
It was.
It's computers.
It was working fine, it just isn't on the computer now, and I can't find it. So,
It's all.
we.
Okay.
Find out.
Again, so this is a review. David fled Saul's court at Gibeah, and I'll have a map to show you where that is, not that it matters so much, but after Saul attempted to kill him, and Saul soon openly declared David an outlaw. David sought immediate refuge with the retired prophet Samuel, who lived in Ramah, and you remember they sent lots of folks out, but they all got caught up in the prophetic frenzy narrated. When Saul pursued him there, David left for Nob, which was then the location of the tabernacle, and the tabernacle is the tent in which the Ark of the Covenant was preserved.
Oh, still around. David's time.
Yes. Oh, yes. David eventually brings brings it to Jerusalem, but
Ah,
it moves, so it gets, all the tribes get to host it. Okay. Nob is where the high priest lived at the tabernacle. The high priest was named Ahimelech, which means my brother the king. Let's see, okay. Ahimelech trembled at the sight of David. Why Ahimelech trembled is not explained. However, David's status in the public mind as potential king had decreased Saul's favor with David, and everyone knew it. He may have heard rumors of this, and was aware that he needed to tread very carefully. Ahimelech asked, "Why are you alone?" And at this point, David lied to Ahimelech. David claimed Saul had sent him on a secret mission and his men were hiding nearby. David said he had left the king in such a hurry that they now needed supplies, starting with bread. Ahimelech said that the only bread available had been blessed by sitting in the presence of God in the tabernacle. Normally, only priests should consume it, and then only when the bread was due to be replaced with warm, fresh loaves on the Sabbath. David seemed to assume that it could be his, saying, "We'll give you 5 loaves and whatever else you have." So Ahimelech stretched the rules to allow males who had not recently slept with women to consume. David promised that he and his men were in the proper state of abstinence because they were on mission.
I'd like to see you explain that a bit later.
Some of this got skipped. And Ahimelech surrendered the bread. Of course, there were no men except David. Jesus used this recorded exception to defend his disciples from the charge that they harvested on the Sabbath in Mark and Luke, showing that exceptions to such rules have been made in the past. A certain man, Doeg, overheard the conversation. He had pledged his loyalty as a soldier to Saul, though he was not from Israel, but from Edom. And Edom is down here below the Dead Sea. David then asked him, like, "Is there a spear or sword here? I left mine in haste." Pretty mean. Only the sword, the only sword here is one that Goliath used, which would be David's by right if he killed Goliath.
Right.
"There is none like it, give it to me," David replied. Now here's where we're going to hint that David was matured into a man, because when he fought Goliath, he could not even wear the armor, much less carry a sword.
Right.
As soon as he secured the sword and bread, David left for the Philistine border with the idea of serving the Philistine king, King Achish of Gath. However, once in Gath, as David waited to speak to his king, David overheard servants talking to King Achish about David as the one who killed thousands of Philistines. This king gave a reply that indicated he thought David might have already taken Saul's throne. And suddenly afraid of being killed, David needed to appear as non-threatening as possible. So David pretended to be a wandering madman.
Always a good
Whom King Achish promptly threw out of his court. Jeez. David moved into a cave in Adullam. So here's Adullam down the road. Yeah, Adullam. When his brother and father and mother heard of David's trouble, they left Bethlehem for their own safety and came to David's cave.
So, how did they know where he was hiding?
Yeah.
Well,
Put a shack out in front, or shingle?
Well, you know, I've lived in cultures like this, and the grapevine is magnificent. Anything happens and everyone knows.
When you're hiding.
Well, yes, but you see, they don't particularly particularly like that king.
They're not gonna tell the king.
What?
Oh,
Men also in trouble with Saul or discontented with Saul came to David. Those who owed money and couldn't be paid joined him. And undoubtedly some who simply enjoyed fighting with David also came. David became a captain of 400 men.
That would be fighting like alongside David as opposed to.
Yes, or combat with.
No, I just.
You're right. Yeah, from the cave, David went to Moab, the city of Mizpah, which is all the way, Adullam's right here, and it goes all the way up there.
okay.
Jeez.
Okay, he went to Moab in the city of Mizpah, taking his parents with him. He asked the king there to protect his parents for the duration of his conflict with Saul, and the king agreed.
God, think how much time all this traveling.
The danger.
Yeah.
David returned to the stronghold of Adullam until a prophet from Gad told him to go to Judah and hide in the forest of Hereth, which is up here. Intentional or not, David is creating a political base. His allies include the discontented of Israel, some members of the priestly class, the prophet Gad, and at least one foreign king. Meanwhile, Saul's base is dwindling. We're about to see Saul's own tribe, the men of Benjamin, aren't particularly loyal to him, and he is also about to turn the priestly class away. King Saul, who encamped at Gibeah, asked his fellow Benjaminites why they had not turned to the son of Jesse, and he calls him son of Jesse to remind people that he is not royal, he does not need to be protected, he's just a comeuppance, to receive the king's reward. And he also says up there about, why are you not loyal to me? Because I'm the one who can give you command of armies or property or whatever. Yours, he can't do that. But clearly that's not the issue for him. And that was when Doeg stepped forward and told Saul that he had seen at Nob and how the high priest had helped David. Saul was furious and called the priest to be brought to him. And when Ahimelech came for Saul and answered, came to Saul, I probably should say, and answered, who among all of your servants is more faithful than David? How was I to know that you had made him out? And the timing was about even, he had the name at the same time this guy was. Saul ordered that all the priests and their families should die. But his soldiers would not kill him. So the soldiers aren't going to obey this rule. And there you get an idea of where it's, how dwindling his power really is. Doeg, who was not an Israelite, and volunteered and did care about the. So why must regime change result in uncalculated violence? What motivates and fuels such violence? And what stops or dampens it or even prevents it? Is there a time when political violence is needed? I've been reading about Liberia's history of two civil wars. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Liberia. A book is coming out that I'm going to help try to sell in my neighborhood. But
You wrote that book.
huh?
You wrote that book.
Are you kidding? I didn't write it. I did write one story that's in it, but 50 volunteers
Oh, wow.
memories of their service in Liberia. Anyway, so I've been reading about what happened there and talk about lifting the lid on violence. Charles Taylor found young men, gave them amphetamines and a rifle, and they could go shoot anybody they wanted.
That's nice.
In fact, they were required to shoot. So there isn't anybody living in Liberia today that doesn't have a horror story to tell about what happened. And I don't know why, I just can't imagine why it happened at all. So this is my question to you.
And yet, and I stand in the church and say this, I wouldn't be really sad if somebody knocked out food.
Yeah, exactly.
This is precisely the choice David has for the rest of this story.
I was kind of starting to, well, and so in my mind, regime change doesn't have to result in uncalculated violence, but I think that sometimes the insecurity of one or the other of the two leaders or whatever you want to call them, I want to make sure and get rid of opposition.
Can you hear out there?
Right?
You're frozen. Okay, there. Can you hear him?
We can hear. It's not terribly clear, but we can hear.
Okay,
I don't speak terribly clearly either, Whit, so
not true.
anyway.
But she's saying that leadership makes a difference as to what kind of violence occurs, if any. And I think you're right. And custom, I think. The ability to agree on some things, whether or not you're on either side of the argument.
Yeah.
That there are limits to what you do.
Theoretically, here in the States, we have a peaceful, what do you call it, transition out,
Yeah,
theoretically,
but it came close.
yeah. But that expectation is not the case if you have authoritarian governments.
Yeah.
And so, the dictators probably not going to say, oh, yeah, I should probably step down today, somebody else can take my place.
One of the things that happens in Africa is tribal war against enemies that have always been your enemy. And that doesn't help calm things down. Anyway,
Does that peak during a regime change?
well, especially if, like in Ethiopia, one tribe has been in charge, now they've been displaced, the other tribe is seeking revenge. That kind of thing is happening in Cameroon too. And it's happening in other places. Okay, one of the priests, the son of Ahimelech, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to David for safety. And when Abiathar told David what happened at Nob, David said that he had seen Doeg there. David thought he should have guessed Doeg would report to Saul, and he said so. I am responsible for the loss of the lives of your father's people. Therefore, Abiathar, stay with me, and I will keep you safe. So if he were Robin Hood, this is his friar.
Yeah.
What degree is the death of the priests David's fault? How much responsibility should he assume? Have you ever noticed that following a death, there is a phase of guilt over what more one could have done for the loved one who died? What is that really about?
He did con the priest, though. He kind of sort of.
He
lied
did,
to him.
he had a great deal to do with it.
Yeah, right.
But he didn't kill him.
No.
And I don't think that's a reasonable response to what they did. Especially under the circumstances that they didn't know he was out there.
Well, Saul is mentally ill. We established that last week, so he had a ego problem. Yeah, that too.
In response to your question about, the guilt after death, I think some of that is, an unwillingness to accept that death is part of life. And rather than blame God, I'm going to blame myself, kind of like kids take on the guilt for their parents' misbehavior because they need their parents to be okay parents, even though they're lousy parents. You know, they take on that guilt. And I think in some ways, you know, there's a warped theology that says it must be God's fault, and it can't be God's fault, so it must be my fault. Whereas in fact, it's neither God's fault nor it's my fault, it's just should happen.
And I think all of that just has to do with our need to make sense out of things, period. And so it's part of that process.
Yeah. A need to make sense. Maybe. I don't know, I've noticed I do it, so
Well, I don't know, and I also wasn't referring to that situation in particular, but
Can you get us to the next set of slides?
Maybe. Okay, Zoom prayer, guys. Let me close this one. Okay, I'm gonna stop share. Then you can click, yes. Hey, God, technical challenges here.
Okay,
Sure.
perfect.
Sure. No. No. Okay, can you guys see that? No.
Not yet.
It's not, that's your screen. Measure. Here we go. No. Well, why is it not showing?
Unless you have any more slides to show, just exit share screen.
I'm working on another set, but it doesn't seem to want to. I'm looking
Put
at it.
it down, put it in yellow. Close this.
Sorry, guys.
That's all right. You're on speaker view. So if you want to show gallery, just go to gallery.
Yeah, no, I gotta figure out this thing. Actually, it's on here. Right, so what is this thing?
You're on.
Right, somehow.
You don't know, we didn't learn from it. So
Somehow we got it. Thank you for your prayers, it's been that.
okay. Okay, so let's see.
Oh, the podium there.
There you go.
David heard yeah, I know, right. David heard that the Philistines were robbing the threshing floors of Keilah and asked God in prayer if he should attack the Philistines there. So we're getting an idea of David's character. He doesn't have to do this, he can just stay in the cave. But he feels, I think, he has to or do something. You know, he's not a guy that just hang out, I guess. David's men were not so sure they should attack, but God answered David, promising that David would win. And thus they went and won. After the battle, David and his men entered the city. Now when Saul heard this, he ordered his soldiers to attack Keilah in order to trap David inside the gates and walls of Keilah. And when David heard that Saul was on his way, David asked Abiathar for his ephod. That's the thing he's wearing around his chest. And with this in hand, he prayed. The Bible does not say that David used the Urim and Thummim that are attached to the back of the ephod, but I think he did. Those two stones would have been in the back of the ephod and were used to answer yes and no questions, kind of like the 8-ball.
Okay.
Is Saul coming? The answer was yes. Will he destroy Keilah? It's a matter of drawing without seeing which stone putting your answer, I think, or throwing. The answer was yes. Will the city turn me over to Saul? The answer was yes. David left the city. And when Saul heard David had escaped, he gave up the expedition. So thank heavens he didn't blame Keilah for David's presence.
Yeah.
David hung out in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul chased David, but the Lord kept David safe. This is Ziph, Keilah, Adullam, Gibeah. Jonathan did meet David at Horesh, which is near Ziph, and said, Saul knows you will be king, and I will be second to you. Do not be afraid of Saul. David promised Jonathan to rule with him as his second in command. And they were. When the Ziphites betrayed David by telling Saul where David was hiding, Saul pursued. And when Saul was in the valley, in one valley, and David in the next, with a small mountain between them, large rock, really, David got word of the Philistines, of a Philistine attack, and immediately abandoned his search to respond to the Philistine incursion. Following this event, the mountain was called the Rock of Escape. David went to the strongholds of En-gedi. This is a sort of spring that flows into the Dead Sea. Okay. And when Saul returned from fighting the Philistines, he took 3,000 well-chosen men to hunt for David in En-gedi around the Rock of the Wild Goats. And while the search party that Saul led took a break, Saul entered a cave to use it for a toilet. Saul sat down on some rocks to do his business. David happened to be hiding much further back in the same cave. David's men wanted David to kill Saul. David said, no, this is the Lord's anointed one. And this is the leadership that sets the boundaries for violence. So you get an idea. And then David quietly came forward with his knife. He really didn't want to do this, but his men had to have something, I think. So he sliced a portion of Saul's cloak off into David's hand without alerting Saul to his presence.
So does that mean Saul was deaf too?
Well, I
I
think,
mean, you can't really be that quiet in a cave.
I'm just saying.
You're just saying at the moment, okay.
I think you really could, depending on the floor of the cave, if it was solid rock, you could walk on it without creaking. And he may have taken off his cloak and set it aside in order to do this.
Business, you're right.
So, anyway, to David, even this seemed disrespectful to Saul, but it was done. When Saul left and there was a safe distance, and none of these pictures show a safe distance from Saul, he called him saying, my Lord and King. David made a deep bow and put his face on the ground. And then David rose and said, your people are telling you David seeks to do you harm. David held up the piece of cloth. This very day the Lord delivered you into my hand. I cut off your cloak, but I did not kill you. David continued, though you hunt me, I have not, nor will I ever raise my hand against you, for you were anointed by the Lord. Is this really your voice, my son David? This is a very kind thing for him to be saying at this point. It's like David's kindness finally pierced his madness. You have repaid only good while I have done evil to you. May the Lord reward you, for I know that you shall surely be king. Swear that you will not hurt my descendants. And David promised to protect them. Many scholars believe that there may have been only one incident like this, and yet there are two stories with different details with the same plot in Samuel. Both were incorporated into 1 Samuel in a trilogy of stories about withholding the urge to violence as a way to advance or have satisfaction. We raise it there next. And then you go. How many of you know these stories?
First time I've heard them.
Not me.
Okay.
But they sound very Shakespearean in storytelling, don't they?
Or maybe Shakespeare sounds like them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hey, this would be a perfect one for him to write.
Yes. 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 Okay, remember Samuel was the prophet, had been the way that the country had been ruled up to the kings. King Saul, in fact. The Bible says, now Samuel died. All Israel assembled and mourned for him. They buried him at his home in Ramah. And the next paragraph says, then David got up and went down to the wilderness of Paran. David and his wife, Nabal. There was a man in Maon, whose property was in Carmel. So here's Carmel, there's Moab, there's the Dead Sea, and there's the wilderness of Ziph, and this is the wilderness of Moab. Well, kind of desert place. I like this picture.
That's cute.
He was very rich, owning 3,000 sheep and 3,000 goats. His name was Nabal, a name which means fool. His wife's name was Abigail, which may mean the divine father rejoices.
Mhm.
Abigail was clever and beautiful. Nabal was surly and mean. He was a Calebite, a politically powerful family in Judah, descended from Caleb, Joshua's friend, best friend. Nabal was shearing his sheep, which was a time for feast and party. It was also a time for generosity and repayment of kindnesses. And that was why David sent 10 young men with these instructions: go to Nabal and greet him in my name, and may peace be with you and peace be with your house. So he's teaching them to be very polite and not too aggressive. But then say, all the time your sheep were grazing in Carmel, your shepherds have been with us. We did no harm to them, and in fact, we kept watch over them. So share with us the feast you share with your servants. Now, this leads one to wonder whether David is exercising more authority over people than he should, perhaps, or whether he's deserving of this. And he seems to think he is. David's men did as they were told, and Nabal refused. Nabal said, "Who is this David? Who is the son of Jesse?" Obviously knows who David is. But that is a way of diminishing David, that title. Shall I feed outlaws and runaways? Shall I take meat? Shall I take meat and give it to my employees and give it to strangers? The son of Jesse phrase is an insult, and so is the idea that they are runaways. They runaways from their obligations to Saul. When David heard this, he was angered, and he said, "Every man of you strap on your sword." So we get an idea that David has within him the same anger that Saul does. As he says, David went on to say that he intended to kill every male in Nabal's household. By the way, we're an adult audience. They use a phrase to describe male in Hebrew, and it's everyone who pees on a wall.
Okay.
Anyway. I didn't know.
Like, really?
Is there any difference between David's rage and Saul's when he killed the priests? How well would David be received as a new king if he killed a member of a prominent family in Judah? And what right does David have to take this kind of action?
Sounds like it's everything to me.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's about to go off the rails. And with him, he would bring a level of violence to all the men that are with him, although would not be good. 400 men went with David. 200 stayed to guard the camp, and some of you may notice that David's name thrown.
okay.
However, just after the 10 men visited Nabal, some of the shepherds told Nabal's wife Abigail about David's request. David sent messengers out from the wilderness to Nabal asking for a donation of food, and Nabal insulted them. David's men were very good to us. They stole nothing from us, and they were a wall of safety for us both day and night. It is wrong not to fulfill David's request. In fact, it's a miracle nothing was lost, as they claim, and they must have done a tremendous job of keeping all kinds of wild animals away from the sheep. However, Nabal was so full of rage, no one can speak to him about this. In a rush, Abigail gathered 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already dressed up, 5 measures of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes.
Okay.
Well, they're rich.
Yeah.
And she and her servants loaded them on donkeys, and she told her servants to go ahead of her, that she would catch up. And she did not tell Nabal what she was doing. Now David was angry and was coming down the mountain, and Abigail and her servants met them. And David had been talking to his companions about destroying Nabal and everything he owned. Abigail arrived, dismounted her donkey, fell first to her knees and put her face on the ground, and that is something we do before a king. And she began apologizing for not sending the food immediately. Abigail then said, do not take ill-natured Nabal seriously, for he is, as his name suggests, a fool. I am not. I didn't know about your request until after your men left. Now the Lord had enabled me to save you from doing things to Nabal that you would regret. Accept these gifts and give them to your young men. So it's an interesting role for her to play in a Shakespearean play, if you will. She is making peace. And she knows that she has to. And she's smart enough to know what the ramifications of all of this will be. She concluded saying, "Let the Lord deal with my Lord." And so we get the idea that the right way to do things is to let the Lord claim vengeance if God wants to. Let it be. And David then responded, "Blessed be the Lord who let me meet you today, and who thereby saved me from the guilt of avenging myself today by shedding blood." So David comes out of his fault. Go to your house in peace, and I will leave Nabal to God. And God steps right in. Abigail returned to her home to find Nabal feasting and too drunk for serious conversation. So Abigail waited until the morning, and then she told him about her encounter with David. The news struck him so that it was as though his heart had died within him. Nabal became like a stone. 10 days later, he died. We would probably say that he had a stroke. The Bible attributed this stroke to the Lord, saying, "The Lord struck Nabal." When David heard about Nabal's death, he also thought the Lord did this. He once again thanked God for preventing him from doing evil to Nabal. And then David does something very politically astute. But who is the hero here, and what motivated that hero? And who gets to take vengeance and why?
Well, Abigail,
Yeah. One of the very few places where women, there is a psalm, I think it's a psalm or proverb that speaks of the woman of valor, right? And she is that woman.
mhm,
One of my professors said that, at every opportunity in the editing of the Bible, the stories of women surely had to have been discussed about whether they should be there or not. And he said that what appears in the Bible is so important that it can't be edited.
wow.
David soon asked Abigail to marry him. She said yes. And in this way, David joined the powerful family of Judah anyway. So he's cementing all the places he's been are within the tribe of Judah's boundaries. So he's making himself a power base. Wait, you may well ask, isn't David already married to God? Saul's daughter?
They had a lot of women wives then, so, yeah.
Well, yes and no. Saul annulled the marriage, which means he really made it as though there had no marriage.
Oh, okay.
And he gave her as wife to another man.
Ah. You could do that in the Old Testament.
However, in David's time, it was often true that men had more than one wife. And in fact, David soon had yet another wife, and her name was Ahinoam, from the Jezreel, and this was the mother of his oldest son, which gets him in trouble. You get one more? One. I really like not being good at all this work.
Yeah, but then you share
Yay. Okay. So the Ziphites failed Saul again, or failed David again, anyway, but they are good for Saul. And so David is identified and has a location. Saul immediately set out for the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 men to capture and kill David. Saul camped beside the roadside near the hill where David hid. David sent out spies and learned precisely where Saul camped. And David himself set out to find where Saul lay. Abner, the commander of Saul's army, slept beside Saul. Saul was sleeping, and his entire army slept around him. Then David said to Ahimelech, not a priest, of course, and Joab, brother of Abishai, and Joab's brother Abishai, who will go with me to walk around Saul's camp? And Abishai said, I'll go down with you. Soon, with Saul's spear stuck in the ground at his head, Saul lay sleeping at David's feet.
Okay, Marge Timberlake is practicing with a contemporary group. And she's on the altar guild, and she said she forgot the books. So I hope this one's marked. Is it still?
You don't need the altar book.
What?
These are the readings you want anyway.
That's the altar.
These are the readings you want. The second, third one, which is a hymn.
Okay, we've got a visitor here.
Okay, so this is Gospels.
And that just goes in the sacristy.
I'm sorry?
The gospel book just goes in the sacristy.
The only one that's missing is the hymn.
Okay.
Okay, and I don't know where that copy is.
So Abishai whispered, say the word and I will kill him with one stroke using his own spear. David again said, do not. And who can raise his hand against the Lord's anointed? As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him down. And David swore that blessing.
Let's see.
David said, he will die quickly about. For now, let us take the spear and water jar. David and Abishai left the camp without being identified in part because the Lord caused a deeper sleep among the enemy guards. Then David climbed the hill opposite from the camp and called to Abner. Abner responded, who are you and who calls me by name? And David did not give his name, but he said, why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? Where is the king's spear and water jug that was at his head? Now Saul recognized David's voice and he said, is that you, David? It is, David responded. David again said, why does my Lord pursue his servant? Did our Lord stir you up against me? And if it was the men who serve you that turn you against me, they are wrong before the Lord. So he's got the jug and the spear. David continued, do not let my blood fall upon the ground so far from the true Lord of Israel. So he's saying that he's away from the center of power, and that's wrong. And David replied, David, I have done wrong. And again, his kindness pierces Saul's madness. I have done wrong. Come back, my son David, would you? For I will never harm you again, huh? Yeah. Because my life was precious in your sight today. I have been a fool. And David said, here is your spear. Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord will reward my righteousness. May my life be precious in the sight of the Lord. This is really your boast, my son David. You have repaid only good while I have done evil to you. It seems like a repeat. Saul said, David, you have my blessing, and this is what he gets for restraining his violence. Here it is. You will succeed in the many things you will do. This is like a father's blessing, like Jacob's blessing. May the Lord reward you, for I know that you shall surely be king. Swear that you will not hurt my descendants. And David did so swear. Now, this is the second time David has withheld violence from Saul. So in so doing, he has given Saul to opportunity to step away from his desire for vengeance and see his situation with David with clarity. In this moment, he gives his blessing to David as Israel's next king, something that would never have happened if David had attacked. Withholding violence is made for a more peaceful transition of power, or made a more peaceful transition of power possible. No one on Saul's side need feel compelled to avenge Saul by killing David. So he decides to go to the Philistines. After his last encounter with Saul, David realized that it was just a matter of time before Saul killed him. So David moved 600 men and their families to the land of the Philistines, where Saul would not pursue David. And indeed, when Saul heard that David had moved to Gath, Saul gave up the hunt. Now David and his soldiers worked for Achish, king of Gath. They did fight wars with this king against every enemy of the Philistines, and if required, they promised to fight the Israelites. In exchange, King Achish gave David and his men the town of Ziklag and the land around it to farm with their families. We don't know where Ziklag is, but these are the two best guesses.
Okay.
Please notice the Gerzites, the Geshurites, and the Amalekites. Amalekites have always been an enemy of at least Judah. They just hate Israelites, and they've always fought them. And then there's the Jerahmeelites and the Kenites, and the people of Negeb that may be actually tribes of Judah, but these are allies to Judah. Okay? So during the year and a half that David and his men lived in Ziklag, David fought the Gershites, the Gerzites, and the Amalekites. But David told Achish that he fought the desert people of Judah and their allies, the Kenites and the Jerahmeelites. So he lied. And from this, Achish assumed that David would have made enemies of his own people and would never go home. When each battle was won, David always came home with the enemy's livestock, which he gave to the king, or King Achish, and so Achish was not overly curious. The peoples David did fight traditionally raided Judah's farms and herds, so in fact his forays benefited Judah. However, in order to lie successfully to Achish, this is a bad thing. David saw to it that there were no enemy survivors of his will. However, the day would come when King Achish made war with Israel, and Achish intended for David and his men to fight on the Philistine side. And because of David's lies, the king appointed David's men to be his personal bodyguards, which meant that in the war, they would be at the center of the battle, and there would be no denying that they were there, and anyone fighting them on the other side would know that. What do you think would have happened if David fought against Israel at the enemy's side?
He wouldn't have become king.
I think that would end his, I don't think, how could you? How could you if your brother was killed in battle? How could you accept this? Yet David could not refuse because he was born loyal to the king. So that's the fix he's in. And that's for next week. Next week, Mark Kelly is going to present because every fourth Sunday I go to Georgetown. So he'll have the slides. Cool. Okay.
Have a nice trip.
So good night, guys, or good afternoon.
Good night.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for presenting. Good job.
Thank you. Bye-bye.